In this unit, I want to talk about how to validate a form using JavaScript. Obviously very valuable. It's the same kind of stuff we did in Programming Logic Intermediate. How do I take that data that the user has entered and let them know whether or not it is valid? We will then semi-duplicate this process when we get to PHP next semester. But in the meantime, I still prefer JavaScript validation because the user gets immediate feedback. Remember, PHP is processed on the server. And the server should only need to validate the form if the JavaScript didn't do it. Some people still are all freaked out about JavaScript and how they're going to get infected with viruses and spyware and all kinds of stuff because they have their JavaScript turned on and they turn it off. So next semester we'll learn how to validate a form's inputs in case JavaScript didn't do it in PHP. But in the meantime, we'll learn how to do it in JavaScript. Excuse me. First thing we have to learn how to do so that we can do validation is create event handlers and also sense when validation is due when the users clicked on the buttons. There's a number of ways to do this, and I want to cover a few of them because you might see them on the web. But really, I only do one, and that's where I have an external JavaScript file with all the event handlers and all the wiring and everything inside that external file. Let's open button test. So here's the button test file. There's not much to it. We do need to tweak this because I did put the new Voker tools out there with this, but I forgot to update all the links, so it's 13.11.21. To title case. And then this should be fairly familiar. We've seen it in a couple of other programs where we did the onload function to reset our forms so the Firefox automatically removes all the data from the form whenever we press F5. By default, Firefox leaves your data in there, so you don't have to re-enter it. But in our case, for testing purposes, we want the form cleared. This window onload automatically runs when the window loads, and we have an anonymous function that's associated with it. The function doesn't have a name, it just executes all this stuff. We also defined another anonymous function called, actually this one's not quite anonymous, called $. That is a pseudonym or a shortcut for us to say document get element by ID. Here's an example of using that. $, the ID name, in quotes, that's an ID name, and then whatever it is you want to do with that. This command resets the form. It's like clicking a reset button. The form itself simply has a text box and a button so that we can test that things work. And it has a function down here at the bottom, and notice where I put it. Again, this isn't normally where I would put my JavaScript. Underneath the body, kind of gets lost. The good news is it doesn't blend with the HTML, doesn't clog up the top of the form where we put it before. Best idea is still put it in an external file. In our second example today, we'll do that. But in this case, the function's not the issue. The function doesn't do much. The question is, how do we get to the function? So the function's name is function test. It gets the text from the text box, checks to see if it's empty. If it is empty, it yells at the user. If it's not empty, it title cases it and then simply returns. Now, if I attach this to a button, what happens by default to buttons, most buttons, if you define them properly, most buttons will submit. Buttons by default are considered submit buttons unless you change their types. The only exception to that is a button whose type is not submit. Then it's not a submit button. Most buttons, input submit buttons, input image buttons, even just plain old buttons, automatically submit. So on this form, this button, if I remember right, is a regular old button. There it is. Its type is submit, has an ID. And now what we want to do is link this button to this function. There are a couple of different events that we could take a look at. First one is an on-click attribute, which is different than I normally do it. But again, you see this a lot on the web. And sometimes you see forms that execute and they do things when you click on buttons and you're looking around for the JavaScript and where it ties together and you can't find it. It's because it's buried inside the button tag itself using an attribute. A form can include an onSubmit attribute. We're going to try these first. So let's start, first of all, with a button on-click attribute. So here's my button. After everything else, I can add an on-click attribute. And in here, inside of quotes, you simply write some JavaScript. Whatever you want it to be. And it can be fairly simple. It can be pretty complex. In this case, what I'm going to say is just run my test function. You need the parentheses because we are actually calling that the semicolon. Many of you have discovered that JavaScript is fairly forgiving if you don't put semicolons in, but oh boy, can it be nasty when you don't. And it says goes merrily on its way, but your code doesn't function right. I'll be watching your code. Good idea to put semicolons in. So this should call that function now whenever I click on the button. And again, what the function does is checks to see if everything is empty. If it is empty, we get yelled at. If it's not empty, we get title case, and it submits the form. This is a submit button. One other thing to remember, though, is that the function has a return value. Actually, in this case, let's skip that for a second. So I'm going to refresh this page. And I'm going to type Voker in there, and it should capitalize it. And I still, what do you mean you don't have, oh, it wants to go out to my web. Oh. All right, finally got my machine up and running so I can test this, but unfortunately it doesn't work. So now I'm going to do a little live debugging and try to figure out why. I put a breakpoint in here. It's not getting to my test function. And I honestly don't understand why. It's not coming down here to call this, even though my on-click event. Uh-oh, there's my button. It doesn't have an on-click event, so I must have forgotten to refresh this or save it. Look. So there we go. Let's try again. That's better. So now what's happening is as I click run, when I click the button, this on-click says run that test function. But the way I wrote this is if I leave it blank, I'm supposed to get an alert and then set focus to text input. I got my alert, please enter some text, but then off it goes to it submitted the results anyways. And that's because we didn't process the return value. Any functions that respond to a submit event should return either a true or nothing or a false. When you return a false, it cancels the submit. However, the call to that function has to then accept that. And this function, the way we wrote it, just says, click on it, and no matter what, run this function. And it ignores the return value. If we instead put a return on this, now this function, test function, is going to execute, but if it returns false, it cancels the submit. But we have to capture that result. Should still be able to put my name in there, have it capitalized, that worked. But now when I leave it blank and run, I get my message and it puts focus back in my text box and it cancels the submit. It comes in very handy, particularly when we're doing validation to say, let's take a look at all the user's inputs, see if everything's there. If it's not, cancel the submit because they're not ready to submit this to the server, put it in the database, do all that stuff yet. So it's very important that we remember our functions have to return the values, but not only that, the functions that actually do the calling have to then catch that, capture it. So that's how we can code a button. The other thing we can do, I'm going to cut that from here now. The other thing we can do is actually code the form. So now I'm going up to the form, and there's my action. I'm going to run out of room, so I'm starting a new line. You can leave it up there if you wish. I'm going to create an onSubmit method. Just like all the other languages that you've learned, all of these event handlers have specific names. There's key press events in C#, there's click events, there's form load events. They all have specific names. And now this says, return the results of the function when the user submits the form. It's no longer attached to the button. Now, how many different ways can I submit this form? One, I can click the button. But I might have on a form 5 or 6 buttons that all submit, which is pretty rare. So this is just really an alternative. Save it, refresh, and it does exactly the same thing. This one to me is almost worse because it's now buried inside the form statement. It's bad enough when it was buried inside the button. If I'm the maintenance programmer trying to figure out where's the click event for this thing? It's responding and it's working, but where's the click event? It's buried inside the HTML. If it's something really short, okay, maybe. It's a very small page, only has this one little piece of JavaScript on it, then maybe. But if there's a lot of JavaScript to it, probably better off putting it in a separate file, having all the JavaScript in one place so that you can find it. Intercepting the normal processing. We attach code to it, and you can also do this to the reset button, by the way. You can intercept the reset button, and if you return false to that, it won't reset the form. So you could add one of those dialog boxes. Are you sure you want to start over again? Because you just clicked on cancel. Are you sure you want to start over again? If they say no, you can intercept that, turn off the reset, and bypass it. This is what we just did. As I've been saying, I don't particularly like these buried inside the HTML. I prefer to have some kind of wiring done beforehand. So now we're going to learn how to do it, I would say, the correct way. And the correct way is in that window on load function, we wire, if you will, the on-click event to an event handler. The on-click event of an image to an event handler. The on-click or submit event of the form to an event handler. So let's try that. I'm going to take this out of here. And then go up into form load. And after all this other fun stuff, I'm going to say that when the user clicks on that button, and the button's name is BTN test, on click. It's all lowercase. There's no parentheses. The on-click event equals, and now we're going to give it a method name, which was function test, right? Or was it test function? Now here's the one that always gets me. If you put parentheses in here, you're invoking the function, and JavaScript expects the function to return a pointer to the function that it's supposed to be at. Wait a minute, no. I just want this function to be my event handler. If you put parentheses on there, it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is JavaScript actually executes the function. Instead of saying, this is who I'm wired to, this is who I'm linked to, it actually executes the function because the parentheses are there. and expects the function to return a pointer to a function that it's supposed to execute. What can be done, but normally it's a mistake putting parentheses on there. Got it in my notes, put it in here as well. No parentheses, exclamation mark. And now I should have the same result. Whenever I click on the button, test function executes. And because this is an on-click event that does a submit, this does capture the false that gets returned. And if there's a false, it stops the submit. Stop the submit. Submit it. Still works. We can do the same thing with the form on submit. We're going to comment this one out. You don't normally do both. Why would I have one event that executes when you click a button on a submit button and then have an on submit event that executes as well? Which one happens first? I haven't quite figured that out. So you don't normally do both, but here's another way you could do it. Form test dot on submit equals the test function. Done. So there's a couple of different ways to wire up your buttons and your forms. Whether you use the buttons or the form really doesn't matter much to me because they have the end result, same end result. As long as the button is a submit button. Remember, you can define a button that is just a button. It doesn't submit at all. It just executes something.
You then like create a class and link it to that class to do the, not a class, I'm thinking CSS, but in your JavaScript, you write a function and link it that way to tell the button what it's supposed to do on the click?
Yes, you're right. You still write a function. You still link it to the button's click event, but it's not a submit button, so it's not submitting a form. You can also on-click just about anything else. I had examples in my notes of on-clicking of pictures and on-clicking of text boxes, for that matter. There are a lot of other events that we're going to see as we go along here that you can write code for that don't submit anyways. But what we generally want to do in the on submit is do a one more scan of the entire page to make sure that they hit all the required fields. And if they don't, they left a required field blank, then we stop the submit, make them go back, fill it in. It's kind of like that last check we did in the class in Programming Logic Intermediate. We did check every single field on the form that's required, make sure it's there. If it is, then carry on. And now we're supposed to add a reset button and show that we can do something different for reset. So I'm going to back up here and go into my code and add another button. I'm just going to copy this one. And I'm going to change its type to a reset button. Change its name. And normally that would clear out the form, and it still does. So now there's a button that clears the form. But if I wish, I can intercept that using the exact same technique, but I have to use the button. I take it back. There is a way to do it with the form as well. You can obviously do it with the button. We can do an on reset. And then write a function. And I could write the function here. I could put it down with the other one. Since I'm close by here, I'll just put it right here. And once again, by returning false, the normal behavior of the reset button is canceled. If I leave that out, or if I return true, then it resets the form. And changing its value to MSTC and then letting it reset the form doesn't make a lot of sense. I never get to see the MSTC. So now when I reset the form, I've intercepted it, and it puts MSTC in there instead of clearing it. And you can do any processing in there, like displaying an input box, a prompt, and asking, are you sure you really want to clear it? But that too can be intercepted. We will be using it to reset radio buttons. So when you reset a form, radio buttons are often not affected. Or if they are, they can't all be cleared out. One of them has to be selected. So we want to clear them all out. We want to, on reset, go wipe out our radio buttons as well as all the other stuff that probably got done automatically. So we'll make some use of those. So that's the way I usually do it. Let's switch files now and open the index file. This one's a little more, I don't know if normal is the right word, but a little more proper. Here's the index file. It has some styles associated with some JavaScript that's associated with it. There's not much in the index file, but I'm going to open it up just in case. There we can see it running. It's just a form with all different kinds of inputs that we can validate in different ways. But this form when I look at it, doesn't have any JavaScript embedded in it. What it does have is a bunch of JavaScript files to all the different tools that we might want to use for validation. Unfortunately, I ran out of time today because I'm having an argument with one of your fellow students. I lost. So we need to do a quick fix on that. I'm going to do a search and replace for a 2012-11-11 and replace that with a 2013-11-21. That should update to all my new latest and greatest vocal tools. And this ties into the Unit 10 JS file. So now that we've seen this, there's not much to it, except there is one little piece here. The window on load, notice it says here, window on load fills this H3 tag with the date and time, which is really convenient for us when we're testing because I keep looking. If I'm not sure if I've refreshed or saved, I can look at the date and time and see that I need to refresh because it's 5 minutes ago and I've done a lot of changes since then. So I like to put that in there. It also shows you a way to do that using JavaScript. But other than that, this is just normal text box data input stuff that we've been form methods that we've been messing with. So I'm going to go into the JavaScript and I'm also going to open the Unit 10 JS file. And it's got all the details in it and a couple of skeletons that we're going to use. And I think at this point I'm going to switch my windows around so I can see both of these at once because I tend to bounce back and forth between them. So here's my JavaScript and here's my form, and we'll be messing with both. In the JavaScript itself, notice the var $ function is built way at the top so it's available to everybody. And then in onload, taking out the reset, put it back whenever I'm ready, I grab the current time. That's the object that was on the form, and I set it to new date. And today in Swift, we were messing with dates and what happens when you instantiate a date object. Just about any language, you get the current date and time, format it to the local string, with a string for the current locale where I am. It senses where I am by the clock on the computer and displays that. So when I preview the page, I get a time across the top, and every time I refresh, it updates that time, and I can check to see that this is the most current version of my program. But you may also want to put that on your form for some other reason. It's a quick way to do it. Also in form load, I've already on-clicked to validate the form and on-click to reset the form, just a couple of empty methods down here that we're going to start filling in. There's one other method that I have in here, and it's called no short circuit and. You might, not too many of you are VB programmers, but you might remember in C# that all multi or compound conditions short circuit. So if you have this and this and this, and the first condition is false, never evaluates the other conditions. Well, in this program, when we submit, I want to go through every single input on the form, and if it's still bad, mark it with an error marker. If this is true, and this is true, and this is true, and this is true, then submit the form. It never gets to all of those. It only processes one. So this is an interesting, a JavaScript solution at least, for writing a no short circuit and. In other words, process every single condition you're given, regardless of whether or not you already know the answer. So you'll see the use of that, I think, a little bit later, I hope. Okay, back to the notes. One of the things that's made validation, I almost want to say easier, but I really hesitate, trickier, is HTML5. As we've seen already in this class, HTML5 has added some cool new features to the language, some of which can be used for validation, and that's what I want to discuss here. Which ones help us with validation? But we still can't quite guarantee that every page that's going to access our website is going to be HTML5 compliant, and then there's still no standard. But nowadays, I've been at this long enough that if your web browser is not HTML5 compliant, it's time to start complaining to somebody, because that's crazy. I think we're talking IE 8, Firefox 10. Got to go back a long way to get away from HTML5 compliance. We've already seen a lot of these things. Let's talk about them in a validation role. We've seen that there is an email object, so we can designate an input as an email type. And if you submit the form and what you've put in that box does not match probably some regular expression that's now built into HTML5, does not match an email description, you get yelled at. So let's try that. Here's my form. I'm just going to use the username temporarily as my placeholder for this. And instead of designating as a text field, I'm going to designate it as an email field. Save it. Refresh the form. And in here, if you leave it blank, it doesn't complain. But if you just type in Voker, that's not an email address, and in Firefox, you get a pink box on blur. And if the user's not sure why the box is pink, they can hover, and it'll please. It's one of the reasons I'm not real. There it is. Tell them what's wrong. Please enter an email address. Not the greatest error message. We used to be able to supplement that, but that seems to have gone away. Used to be able to use the title attribute to supplement the error message. Put your own clarification in there. Doesn't seem to work anymore. Used to be in my notes. I just took it out. So this is the error that we get. If we then try to submit the form, then it pops up in a little quote box on the very first error on the form only. The downside to this type of validation is Firefox will give you pink boxes, but you got to hover, and hover just right to get what's wrong with it. And even then, not real clear why that's not an email address, though it shouldn't be too bad. And then when you submit, it marks the first one with one of these little pop-up dialogues, but only the first one. there's 6 things wrong on the form, you fix this, and then you test, and you fix the next one, and you test. You can do them one at a time, 6 times. So that helps, particularly since I didn't have to write any validation, and HTML5 and Firefox and most, I think even IE does it now, just telling me that's not an email address. And now it's happy. So that can come in handy.
Does it make you have the .com?
Yeah, not .com. It can be a .net. I think somewhere in here I described it. It wasn't.
Something.
I don't think there has to be that.
Nope. Good. I don't know. I don't usually validate email. Let them type whatever they want. And if it's wrong, then so be it. But now we have the ability to check those kinds of things without us writing any code. And we cannot submit this as long as that is wrong. Now it's wrong because it's got a dot without anything after it. I cannot submit this form as long as that is bad. So that's good validation that's been added to HTML5 to help us. The same kind of thing with a URL. Downside to the URL is most people don't realize that you can't just type www.vokergall.com. So one of the things that Opera does is it automatically adds it. One of the things that might be a good exercise in here is to write JavaScript, see if a string starts with http:// or :// excuse me, and if it doesn't, append it. So the user doesn't have to worry about it. But again, it gives us the same kinds of error messages. It says that's not a valid URL address, please try again. And it's simply analyzing what you've typed. It does not actually go out and try to connect to that page and see if it really exists. Just analyzing it to see if it's in the right form that could potentially be a valid email address or web address. So that one comes in handy. I'm going to put my username back to text now. And remember, even if some of these HTML5 input types have not been implemented in your browser yet, it's still a good idea to use them because it changes what the user sees on their keyboard and mobile devices. And that's got to be in the back of your mind pretty much all the time. All right, for numbers, they appear as up-downs. So that helps a little bit. We've already seen that if you want decimal places in those numbers, then you have to provide a step value. Users can type the values, but what doesn't happen, I'm going to change the integer value here now from text to number. Firefox gives me the up-downs. What it doesn't prevent me from doing is typing in there. There is an on-key press event. We're going to learn how to use that, intercept any of the keys that are going toward these text boxes and going, it's a number field. Why are you typing letters? Just ignore them. But that doesn't happen automatically, so there's an opportunity for us to help the user out a little bit. Well, what happens in this case if I submit? I get an error. In Opera, if I remember right, Opera just does the best it can and sends that. Chrome does some, they all treat these, if you type text in there, treat them a little bit differently. Field does not prevent letters. Chrome and Opera, inputs don't even like commas and dollar signs. That's kind of scary. Text entries are ignored. Opera submits nothing. As we just saw, Firefox returns an error. Chrome does you a nice favor and just returns the most recent valid entry. Ew. So I say that this is a number, I type Voker in there and I leave the field, it puts it back to 10 or whatever was in there before. It ignores my latest entry. Probably not bad, but I'm not a big fan of automatically changing users' inputs. That one bothers me a little bit. We can set min and max on these. So let's just jump ahead and look at those real quick. Even before HTML5, there were attributes that you could define for numeric and date fields to designate the minimum value, and what's missing here is the maximum value. Either one, they're used exactly the same way for that field. And so I could do that in here. Could set a min and a max, probably quotes.
Looks like you already have a max. Is that something? Oh, that's for the.
That's for the max length, is how wide it is. In case it's showing up in something, well, it probably affects it here too. But if it's only showing up in an IE browser that doesn't have errors, an older one, gives it a size. Now I defined in a min and a max, I believe. Where did the 1 come from? Start at 5. Can I go up? And it stops. So I can do those. One of the things I saw in one of my sources is that this may not be such a great idea because I'm now putting business rules in my GUI. Back programming logic intermediate. The GUI's job is to display stuff, not to make the rules. The rules, the business rules, belong in the code someplace. In this case, we can place them in our onLoad event in the JavaScript. So the name of that was, pretty sure it's txt value. Did I put that in the wrong place? No, I think I had it in the right place. Yep, txt value. We can set its minimum equal to 5 and its maximum. And at this point, notice I'm using txt value twice. I really ought to define a variable to hold that pointer. What I will often do is declare a variable called ptr to the value. That's my pointer to the value, and it's equal to txt value. And now I don't have to go out and find it, because every time you invoke this $sign, it's actually calling a function called getElementById. And then it has to go walk through the form and find the element, give you a pointer to it, and then you can manipulate it. Probably shouldn't do that over and over and over again. Do it once if you're going to use this more than once. We have to do it once. So if you're only doing it once, you can stick it in front here. But if you're going to use it more than once, I'm going to ask you to define a variable to it for it. Now I've used it lots of times. So this says give me a minimum value of 5, maximum value of 10, and then set the value of that number pointer right away to the min, whatever it is, start at 5. That's all in form load. And now my business rules are in a place where I expect my business rules to be in code. We can also set those, and if we're using an older browser, we can actually look at them later on in code and say, if the value that's in the box is less than the min or greater than the max, then yell at them for it. With the new number fields, there aren't very many left that don't know how to deal with it. Let's look at this and explore, because it's usually the culprit. Pardon me?
Something isn't saved.
Something isn't saved? You're right. Probably over here. So I better check this again.
Would you still want to do that because you can still type in 20 or something?
I can, but it was as soon as I leave the field, if I remember right, if I type in 50 here, as soon as I leave the field, it reverts it to the max. Now it gives me an error. But again, it's this pink error, and does it tell me what the range is? Number that's no more than 10. If I go too low, it actually changes the error message.
But, yeah,
Okay,
and
so yeah, I'm having the same kind of question as you are, the mix of JavaScript versus HTML5. What's the best way to mix with those? What I'm going to show you is a pile of techniques and ask you to demonstrate some of them to me, and then how you put them in your pages, your real world pages, kind of up to you. Maybe the pink box is enough. But the pink box is only a Firefox thing. Firefox right now, as far as I know, is the only browser that gives you a warning as you leave. And in JavaScript, that event is the on blur. I'm leaving, I'm blurring it, like starting to fade away into the distance. It's still there though. It's an on blur event. On blur, Firefox seems to mark these things for colors, but the other browsers don't do that. I launched Explorer here someplace. Where'd it go? Okay, here's my number. And when I leave, and notice there's no numeric up down. This should be Explorer, should be 11. Oh, okay. Now the allow block content, what was that? JavaScript. This is Explorer 11, I'm pretty sure. Internet Explorer 11, and by default, the JavaScript is turned off. You have to allow the content or go into the tools options and turn the JavaScript permanently on, but there's still no numeric up down here. There's an X to let me clear it, which is interesting. Oh, look, it colored my form, my buttons. Oh, nice. Where'd the Voker come from? Must have been there from a previous edition of the form or something. Some more block content. But there's no arrows. If I put 50 in here and leave, it doesn't say anything. It's not until I test my form that it says the number has to be between 5 and 10. So most of the browsers work like that. All of the validation that's done with HTML5 doesn't happen until you try to submit the form. They're basically saying, I'm not going to yell at the user until they tell me they're done. Well, in programming logic, you saw how valuable it can be as you leave the field to mark it with an error to say, this is a problem, you're better going to have to fix it sooner or later. And so, but Firefox is still the only one that does that with the HTML5 fields. So if we want to mark them right away, that's going to be our job. And there's a couple of ways we're going to investigate to do that as well. Let me just check my notes here before we get a break. So that was the min, the max, we saw those, and that was for the number fields. Remember, there's also a slider, the range input. That one's very handy because I'm pretty sure they all use it already. So I'm going to tweak my HTML here real quick and look at it. Maybe it'll be quick. Way too many windows going. Can't see what the heck I'm doing anymore. Let's change this to a range. And notice my size, my min and max are still designated up at the top. And now it's impossible for me to get a number out of range. But what's annoying about the range is it doesn't show you what the numbers are. At least not in Firefox, or is that Explorer now? Can't tell anymore. That's Firefox and Explorer reset. Explorer is the only one that shows you the numbers. Wouldn't it be nice if we could do something like that in the other browsers? I've already shown that to you. In my HTML inputs page, which you can get at any time. We can go to courses and go to web programming, and somewhere under handouts is my HTML5 inputs test. This has a label that's over here, and it has an on change event so that anytime you change this, it changes that label. And if you change the label, changes the bar as you go. And so that's just a technique, and to me, if you're using this range thing, that's great for validation because now you cannot go out of range. If you pump this too high, as soon as you leave, it puts it back. I thought it did. So the range has its value. It's easy to slide, but most browsers, I think IE is still the only one that shows you the number as you're dragging. Everybody else relies on you to do it.
Not showing you decimals, though.
It's not, no, but there's probably, yeah, there must be a step involved here. So let's look at the HTML here and see if there's JavaScript embedded that we can steal. View the source. There's some style stuff. Here's some script, window on load, echo the slider. So the text box for that, the range value is equal to the slider formatted for N1. And then match the slider reverses it the other way. So there's the JavaScript that I have. You can just steal it if you're going to use a range picker to show the value regardless. I don't know in IE if there's a way to turn that off so that you don't use the IE slider number as well as mine. Be a really fun exercise is to modify this to move the text box like it does in IE. Follow the box so it keeps up with you. Mine just sits out on the end. Good enough for now. All right, let's pause there. We'll come back and take a look at what else HTML5 is doing to help us with validation.